Hello and welcome to Massimo B-Sides. This time around we'll be following the esteemed career of Italian developer Massimo Guarini. I've already covered 2 of his games in my Shadows of the Damned video, but if that was too long for you and you didn't watch it, I'll summarize my thoughts on him into 2 words. Literal genius. After his work as director on Shadows of the Damned, Massimo left Grasshopper Manufacture to form his own development studio, Ovosonico, which is a team comprised of about 20 people. During a sale on the PlayStation Network, I noticed his newest game, Last Day of June, was on sale, and yes, his credentials as director of Shadows of the Damned was featured prominently in the description, which I guess implies he's still proud of his work on it, as he should be. But nowhere in this description is any mention of his true masterwork, Open Season.
Gee whiz, I gotta lose weight big time.
Healthy humans.
It was a mistake leaving that off. The game was developed out of a desire to create something with non-gamers in mind. However, the main inspiration for Last Day of June came after Massimo and team watched rock musician Steven Wilson's Drive Home music video. The basic synopsis of the video is about a little man dealing with the loss of his wife after a fatal car wreck took her away. And this is depressingly told through these little stop-motion puppets. Immediately after watching this, Massimo reached out to the animator of the video, Jess Cope, who had worked as an animator on Tim Burton's film Frankenweenie. After hearing about Massimo's inspirations for the game, Cope was eager to contribute to the project, and she became a consultant for the animation. But even after her involvement, there was still one missing piece of the puzzle to fully realize Massimo's vision for the game. He wanted to get Steven Wilson himself on board. Massimo reached out to Wilson, who was initially skeptical about the whole sales pitch, as his own personal concept of video games were tainted by the image of Call of Duty shooters, and he didn't quite like them. In his determination, Massimo and his team whipped up a working prototype of the lake scene from the game. Steven was so captivated by this experience that he immediately agreed to compose the game. And I have to say, the game would not be the same without his musical contributions. Most of the tracks he provided for the game come from Wilson's previous albums that he remastered to fit within the game's world, and he sets the tone very well to match the scene going on before you. So the characters in the game were modeled closely after the music video, but altered slightly to give them their own unique personality to match the game. That's both charming and a bit unsettling to look at once you notice that their eyeballs were scooped out. Even without any facial features to speak of, these characters are quite expressive. This game relies on telling its story without any dialogue. Everything is told in an unintelligible Sims kind of language, and expressed by characters pantomiming their emotions using their body.
Huh?
The game starts with the players being introduced to Carl and his wife June. And my god, you're gonna need some sunglasses staring down this scene. This has gotta be a lethal dose of bloom, Jesus. Is there an official explanation for this?
So we developed an internal shader that we finally call the Marmalade shader that basically acts as a sort of like artistic processing of the whole rendering scene.
The introduction to the game is fairly subtle, as it focuses more on building up the atmosphere and the romantic relationship between Carl and June. It starts players out having Carl pick a couple of flowers for June, and then June expresses that she's cold, and then Carl goes up to the truck, grabs her sweater, brings it down, and she shows him a picture that she's been drawing of Super Carl. We jump into a flashback, and now we're playing as June earlier on the same day, as she's preparing to take Carl on the date. Here we learn June is quite the artist, and through a set of sequences, we're introduced to all the neighbors that live in their town. So far, this seems like a happy game, and for the life of me, I can't discern what the overall goal's gonna be. I guess Carl and June are just gonna live out their days happy together, and that would make for an entertaining game. But as fate would have it, Mr. Sad Shit makes his grand entrance 15 minutes within the game. I don't know if I'm gonna classify these as minor or major spoilers, but this next event sets the course for the entire rest of the game and gives you the reason to do the things you do. So here we go. We flash back to the present where Carl and June's date is wrapping up due to rain. Carl and June enter a truck at the end of their date. And as they're driving home, a terrible accident occurs, causing the death of June, as well as any chance of this game being classified as a walking simulator. So, Carl's a paraplegic now, and he's all alone. As he's cleaning his house to help forget the painful memories of the past, he arrives in the portrait gallery of his late wife, and he notices that a self-portrait of her is ominously glowing. He reaches out to touch it, and then there's a bright flash, and our perspective changes to that of a young boy who's just playing out next to the highway, whom we find out is responsible for the accident that killed June. We flash back to Carl, and he desperately tries to get back into that painting, but it's no use, he can't get back in. The door to his house swings open, and he goes outside. Wandering around town, Carl collects all these different floating portraits of the town citizens, which end up becoming playable characters. Carl uses these portraits to flash back to the day of June's death through the perspective of each one of these characters. There's the boy, who has the ability to walk through fences and knock over barrels with his soccer ball. The best friend, who rakes leaves. The hunter that shoots shit with his gun. And finally, there's the old man that has a special key to unlock certain parts of town. Each character's story is closely intertwined to the events leading up to June's demise in some way. The central mechanic is something you might be familiar with. It's known as the butterfly effect. You see, the choices you make during the day affect the outcome of the day's end and overall June's fate. Yeah, I know this has been done to death in games, to the point of being cliche almost, but it's handled a bit differently here, as the choices you make are not as blatant as do this thing or you're gonna die. They're far more obtuse, as the outcome of a choice isn't quite as obvious. Often you'll do something relatively minor and it has an unintended chain reaction that affects other characters or how the rest of the day will play out. This provokes some experimentation from the player to lay out the day's events in different orders to create the ideal sequence of events. Each character can use their abilities to open up different pathways of town to explore. So you'll find yourself shifting between protagonists to venture into previously inaccessible areas. Once each character's day is solved, we cut back to lonely old Carl, who's being tormented by the specters of his past played out before him in these glowing projections. I have to hand it to the devs for not handling these moments through typical watch a cutscene play out before you or read somebody's boring ass diary entry affairs. Moments that are found in typical indie games. These little scenes stick with you after you're done looking at them. Bloom aside, I love the high contrast art style employed by Ovosonico. They learned a lot from their time with Grasshopper Manufacture, that's for sure. They tend to use color to evoke certain moods of the area that you're occupying. When things are peaceful, you tend to see a brighter, fall-like color palette. But when Carl's in a sad situation, the palette reflects this with the use of darker shades and blues. These choices are thematic to making the world feel like one of June's paintings come to life. It's a short yet compelling adventure that tackles the subjects of regret and depression. And I'm just proud of my boy Massimo for not fucking 5 guys to get his game seen. A lot of developers could learn something from this man. I'm looking at you, Jonathan Blow. Last Day of June is a large departure from the adolescent dick jokes of Shadows of the Damned and the absolute kitchen sink of chaos gameplay design that was known as Open Season. I was never left feeling bored or apathetic towards the story going on, and I never felt like the story was just acting as a heavy-handed mouthpiece for the writers involved. It has a simpler, subtler approach to both gameplay and storytelling that doesn't have an air of pretentiousness about it. That's rather rare for modern indie titles. Now, Ovosonico is still a relatively new company, but with a game as good as this released so early into their lifespan, they're already amassing a respectable portfolio. For that reason, I'll definitely be keeping Ovosonico and Massimo's future projects on my radar. And if you see this game on sale and have a couple of hours to spare, I'd recommend giving it a shot. Thanks for watching, and if you want to see a second episode of Massimo B-Sides on Murasaki, baby, well, you know what to do. Don't forget to pre-order Massimo's new book.
I like pepperoni, mozzarella and anchovy. I like pizza with salami, eggs and cheese and oregano. I like pizza with tomato. I like pizza.